As white as diamonds, silent from a night so cold, such a stillness, calm as the hour glides. Our lives are buried in snow.
Earlier I put a tablespoonful of flour into this jar so that I can make a yeast and capture yeast that's all around us. So I'm going to pour a little bit of water into this jar and make a nice smooth paste. It's quite thick. I'm going to add a little bit more. Mix it. And to capture the yeast in the environment, I'm just going to put it onto the kitchen table and leave it there for 24 hours to capture the yeast. And then I'm going to cover it and put it into the fridge and feed it like I did with the previous section of this video. Now, to make the sourdough bread, I've put in 500 grams of flour, 200 millilitres approximately, or half the big jar of the active starter, and a teaspoonful of salt. So I'm going to close this over using the slow setting. I'm going to start bringing it together with the dough hook. So it's going to be loud just for a second. I have to use my eye for this. Now, there is probably a way that you can work out exactly how much water to put in, but you do have to use your instinct for this, because it's a little bit different every time, because you're working with nature, you're working with frothiness and appearance and so on. So I'm just trying to make a very simple dough. So I'm going to add in about 200 millilitres of water. I can use a spatula just to poke it down at the side every now and again. I'm going to need much more than that. Just bring the camera up to this. So you can see it's still quite dry. So I just have to use my eye, but I don't want to make it too wet. However, if it is very wet at the very beginning stages, it doesn't really matter, because I will be letting it prove, I'll be knocking it back and I'll be kneading it again, and I can add more flour later on. But try to get it to the right consistency from the very, very beginning is important. I will need more water for that. So you know that it's a good dough when it starts to leave the side of the bowl clean. It's still a little bit sticky, but in fact this can be good for using the machine sourdough making. So I'm going to close it over again, and I'm going to put this at a very low setting, like this. And literally, if you have a tea towel underneath the machine, it'll stop it from hopping off the table, and you can knead it for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then you will remove it and then knead it lightly by hand and let it double in size. That'll take about 3 hours, or it'll take overnight if you have it in the fridge. I've used the machine to gather the dough together, and I'm going to give it a light knead on the table. As I said, we will be knocking this back again after it doubles in size. So if it's still a little bit sticky, that's okay, but in fact, I find that if you make it the right consistency before the first rise, you will get a better result. Okay. So it's a nice, loose, shaggy dough. You use a flour dredger filled up to add extra flour to the work surface. And you keep on kneading it. It can take up to 25 minutes, to be honest, until the whole thing kind of gets very smooth and silky on the top. The great thing about the sourdough is that it only needs 3 ingredients: your natural yeast, salt, and flour. Oh, and water. That's 4 ingredients. You need to treat the sourdough not like you're making pastry. Like, you can be pretty rough with this. You can really drag it, pull it, stretch it, toss it around. It needs quite a lot of strength and time. This also helps to bring out the gluten. It's important to note also that I use strong flour. This is Oglin's strong white flour. It's got a high gluten content. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, and that helps with the elasticity of the dough. So if you use plain flour for making your sourdough, you're not going to get as good a result. It won't be as elasticy and spongy.
And some hearts are ghosts settling down in dark.
You can start to bring it from the edges into the center like that to create the smooth, glossy outer surface. Okay. Now you do knock the mixture back after it doubles in size, but in fact if you let this rise and baked it, it would still be fine. It just wouldn't have the same sponginess and aeration that you'd be going for. So there we have a nice silky smooth surface. It's also said that, you know, when you use the dough hook for this part of it, you don't get as open a texture in the dough. You get a better result somehow if you make it with your hands. So at this stage I get a large bowl, I put the mixture down and I brush that with a little bit of oil, place the bowl on top, and I put that into the fridge for 24 hours is actually what I do, until that completely doubles in size. I'll knock it back, which basically means, although it's going to get big, I'm going to make it get small again. And then, before the actual baking, I put a tea towel in a bowl, I put the sourdough into the tea towel, I let it double in size, and then I put it into the oven for 20 minutes at the highest setting with a little bit of steam in the oven to prevent it from drying out. And just to end this, I'm going to brush some grapeseed oil on top to prevent the surface from drying out during the first proving.
No mornings, white as diamond.
Okay, so here's the sourdough after 24 hours. You can see that it's expanded, it's doubled in size. So I'm going to start kneading that and knocking it back into its original shape, and then we'll let it prove again before we bake it.
Our lives are buried in snow.
After kneading the dough and knocking it back into the same shape that it was at the very beginning, I'm going to give it its final rise. So I get a bowl that's in the shape of the sourdough that I want, and then I put a very clean tea towel into the bowl like this, dredge flour on top of the tea towel. This means you're going to have to wash the tea towel after use. Carefully lift the dough up into the bowl and push the smooth side down like that, and then carefully fold it over like that. Well, before I do that, just make sure there's some flour so it doesn't stick. Fold it over, and I'm going to let that rise either at room temperature for 3 hours or in the fridge overnight, and then it'll be ready to bake.
Burdened bands gave strong hands, gaping.
So here's the bread. I have left it at room temperature for about 5 hours. It's really started to rise. Normally what I do is I turn it upside down onto a floured tray, just very carefully, just to keep the shape. So whoops, and then carefully pull that off. Hopefully it didn't stick. It looks like it's kind of sticking actually, which is unusual. I haven't had this problem before, probably because I left it at room temperature. Normally I let it rise in the fridge, and that seems to actually prevent this from happening. Anyway, I have to keep on going, and if this is too messy I can always turn it around the other side. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a little bit messy. Isn't it always the way when you're doing a demonstration? But anyway, it's coming off. It's eventually coming off. Alright, here we go. So yeah, I would definitely let it prove in the fridge for a better result. Obviously that's a little bit messy. I can try to turn it around a bit better. Not great, but better. So I'm just going to turn it in a little bit, just so it has a little bit more height. There's a little bit of cracking on the surface which is going to appear when it's baked. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just smoothen it out, put more flour on top so that it's completely white on the surface. Okay, and then I'm going to get some thread and I'm just going to score it into quarters So 1, 4, and then I'm going to go into 8s. And then I'm going to go again. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to use a very sharp blade and carve wheat stock. Normally I plan this out and I draw it, but I'm just going to go for it. So get a nice sharp blade, Stanley knife will do, and work quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's just some wheat stalks, and I might just get them in the opposite direction. It prevents tearing and stretching. 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, seems fine. And then would this be in between? How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right here is the next space. I'm just counting the amount of incisions I give so that they're all even on both sides. So it's going to be here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we could always go again in these parts here. The trick is to not labour over it, work pretty fast. Okay, then I could make a little bit of a split at the top like that, and just little incisions for fun. This could ruin it, this could make it, we don't know until it's actually done. And sometimes just doing a few little lines like that gives the illusion of the outside of the wheat grain. So I'm working up away from the bottom to prevent it from spreading out too much. And again, you could be very precise. It's easier to be precise if it's come from the fridge, because the dough is easier to work with if it's cold. Okay, so I've preheated my oven. I might just put a little bit more flour on top. And then that's going to go into a hot oven, maximum temperature of the oven, for 20 minutes.
Settling down in dark waters, just as silt grows.
And here we have the final sourdough bread. Nice tap at the top. Let it cool quite a lot before you cut it. Nice and golden brown at the bottom. Hopefully it's cooked all the way through.